Welcome everyone to today's Gems from the Wisdom Tradition. And our topic this week is in the Still and Moving Center Almanac, freedom and self-mastery. And upon reminding myself of that topic, I immediately thought of asking Veena Howard, as someone who has deeply and extensively studied the life of Gandhi. And actually she's a foremost scholar in the world on this particular topic. And I do that for the reason that Gandhi himself led an exemplary life in terms of this concept of self-mastery leading to independence for an entire nation. And so it seems so fitting that we would ask Veena Howard, a Gandhi scholar, to just kick us off and give us some little gems from the wisdom tradition of Gandhi from within the Hindu context and a much broader context in which Gandhi placed himself. So Veena, can I hand it over to you now?
Sure. Thank you. I'm happy to be here in Hawaii with you guys. Most of you are in Hawaii. Where are you from? California, Hawaii, where else? Maybe different places. We can talk about it later. So I want to just start with a chant so we can come all together in this moment. Just a peace chant, and if you can just reflect for a second in your hearts. Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukha bhavet. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityurma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May all beings be happy, may all beings be healthy, may no one experience pain. Please lead us from darkness to light. Please lead us from ignorance to knowledge, and lead us from death to immortality. Om Shanti. So thank you again, Renée, for having me on. So since Renée told me about this topic of self-mastery and freedom, I have been thinking about during the day, at night, in my dreams. That's how I think. I just constantly that stays in back of my mind. What is freedom? What is self-mastery? So I'm thinking about 3 questions. Renée, how much time do I have?
Generally around 10 minutes.
Okay. So 3 questions, or 4 questions I've been thinking about. And if you listen to those questions, maybe you can jot down your answers or think about those answers to those questions. The first one is, what is the difference between self-control and self-mastery? Are they the same or different? Did everyone get that question? Yes? Self-control and self-mastery. So we'll do it like a class. We are not going to do, I'm lecturing. So it's a teaching, you teach me, I teach you, we all are students here. The second is, what's the relationship between self-mastery and freedom? What is the relationship between self-mastery and freedom? And the third is, what is true freedom? We say America is a free country. We are free. Is that the freedom we are talking about? So what kind of freedom we are imagining here? are thinking about. And the last thing I want you to think about, in your mind, think about a historical figure, a fictional figure, or a contemporary example who embodies self-mastery. So how I thought about self-control as an action is an action verb, like controlling, to controlling ourselves. So for example, if I'm not supposed to eat sugar because of whatever reason might be, either because of health issue or because of, I don't think it's good for me, or I think I have too much today, but I have this desire to go reach out to something in the fridge, which is my favorite candy or cake or whatever it might be. So when I control myself, no, I'm not going to eat that, that is the action verb that we are controlling ourselves. So I wouldn't say, oh, I have a self-mastery on my desires to not eat sugar at that time. It is an action. And then self-mastery, how I thought, this is all thanks to Renée that I began to think in those terms. You know, you have so many ideas, but you never think about those things unless somebody prompts you. So what is self-mastery? So self-mastery is a state. It's not, if I say, is a master artist, is a master archer, Renée is a master instructor, or so that's the mastery that one has accomplished, kind of, that we can say rather than mastering is a mastery. So it is kind of an overarching understanding or command on one's own self. And understanding of one's own self, and also that relates to the other human beings, understanding of them. And I'll come to self in a moment, and also the environment. So the self is not simply how I'm dealing with self-mastery just with me, but how I am relating with others. So then the last one is what is Swaraj, or freedom, which is Swaraj or moksha, which is not simply political freedom or the freedom that I can do whatever I want, right? That can be called freedom. I can, dance whenever I want to, I can eat whatever I want to, that's not called, in this context, freedom. The freedom is, for Gandhi's notion, using Swaraj. Swaraj meaning ruling on one's own self, that no one else rules me. No one is my master except I am my master. And then when I say I am my master, who I am ruling, who am I ruling? Body, mind, senses. So these are the questions and definitions I begin with. So let's take it to the Bhagavad Gita, where Cliff talked about it in a couple of sessions ago. So many of you know the story of the Bhagavad Gita. So Arjuna is in the battlefield, and he is mightiest of all warriors, and he's ready to fight the war because he's been preparing it for decades. And he instructs Krishna, who is supposed to be the God, or Lord Krishna, who is incarnation of Vishnu. He knows his divinity. He asks Krishna, position me in between the two armies and let me check who dares to fight with me. And what he sees then, not just stranger enemy, but his own loved ones. His cousins, his gurus, his uncles, his relatives. Suddenly the warrior Arjuna, right? He's known as the Mahabaho, with the great armed Arjuna, the great archer Arjuna. within literally 5 or 10 minutes, I think we can imagine time, when he goes in the middle of the armies and he surveys the battlefield and he begins to shake. His limbs, the Bhagavad Gita tells us, begins to tremble. His hands are trembling. His bow is trembling. He drops his bow and says to Lord Krishna, I could not fight. So what changed suddenly? In this mighty warrior who has been preparing and very, very capable of killing thousands of people and has done it in his life, what happened suddenly that he is unable to act? He lost control of himself. So what the Bhagavad Gita, and then when we study it, we talk about the Arjuna comes in the grip of attachment to his family members, and which binds him to this mental agony and sorrow and inaction. He loses control of himself. And Bhagavad Gita happens to be the favorite text of Gandhi. And some of the scholars question, how could it be the favorite text of Gandhi where Krishna tells Arjuna to fight this battle, right? I mean, the battle is a really bloody war. So, but we have to see the message of the Gita. So where the Gita starts with losing self-control. He is still the warrior, he's still very strong, he still has weapons, he still has armory, he still have arrows in his, but what has gone different now? The selfish or the self-centered desires or fear has taken over him. So the rest of the Gita Krishna does not tell Arjuna, look, your relatives have done wrong to you. Look, your wife was molested. Look, they stole your kingdom. He never says that. Because what he's doing, he's addressing this psychological condition of this warrior. So what he's trying to do, so the Bhagavad Gita is called as a treatise for attaining moksha, which is freedom from this whole constraints of worldly desires and the worldly attachments. Because those attachments, what they do, they cloud our sense of who we are. And that is a very mundane example to that in the battlefield when you see who is against you, who's fighting against you. But look at the recent examples of a surgeon. So I have friends who are doctors, and they said it will be very difficult for them to operate on their own child, even though they're master surgeons. But when the son or daughter or relatives is on the table, they said, we might make a mistake. What will happen? Because we become emotional, we lose self-control, so to speak. So I want to just tell a short story from the earliest ethical lesson in the Upanishads. So there are, God created the world, Brahma created the world, and the three species are created, the humans, and this is a myth, right? So don't, think about a literal literal way, but the message is very interesting. So the gods what are the gods who are the most powerful ones? Demons are not the demonic, not the, you see in the Lord of the Rings or the Harry Potter movies. No, these are the ungodly, who are materialistic people, and humans. The three species are created. And each one of goes to Brahma and says, God said, please teach us something that we can live by. And Brahma says, Da. And Da means, here is Sanskrit is Damyata, meaning self-control. Because when we have power, we have a danger to be controlled by these, that nobody can stop us. So let's unleash our power however we want to. So it's that time it's very important to be self-controlled. And the humans come to God and Brahma and said, please give us a teaching. And he said, da. And here da means Sanskrit, dadati, give. But the humans have desire to hoard things, to really have more than we need. And I think here will come the whole coming together of the self-control and self-mastery. He said, give. Because humans have this desire to hoard, and also to give up. What do we give up? We give up our selfish thoughts, anger, greed. We not only just give with compassionately, we give up. We give up. We know Gandhi said there's no end to giving up. We can give up a lot. And the more we give up, more strong and more restrained we become. And the third, the materialist or the demons said, what to do, should we do? And he said, dadatvam, be compassionate. So when we are not believing in, some higher power or this universal, some kind of universe design, so at least you can be compassionate, be humanist and be compassionate to other beings. But do you think all these three beings are different beings? We all humans are the gods and demons and the humans at the same time, right? We have three impulses. The human impulses are controlling us. So what is then mastery? According to Gandhi, the life is an art. He said, my life is, he didn't have many art in his ashram at all. He didn't like paintings. He didn't like all kinds of statues. He said, I want to curate my life. Like an artist, I want to curate how I can make it in a piece of the very beautiful art. And that's what requires self-mastery. So what is self-mastery then? Is calmness in commotion. Even though there's a lot of commotion, like the Bhagavad Gita's battle, there has to be calmness. Letting go in action. So these are paradoxes. So calmness in commotion, letting go in action, action in inaction. So even if you are acting, you're not acting. Meaning, I think Cliff talked about being a witness. Be a witness to yourself, seeing things happening rather than you are the doer. And then seeing the big picture. I always show my students this little video where you zoom out in the space, zoom out. And then Earth is a little purple blue planet. And I say what you are in that planet. We are not even a grain of sand. A grain of sand is big. So if you think about me, what is me? There's not even a grain of sand. That kind of me it is. Just don't get too worried about it. So I want to, wrap up with, I have a lot of stories. I'll tell you during the discussion. A Taoist farmer. So this is the wisdom in all different traditions. So some of you might have heard the story of a Taoist farmer. So there was a farmer in a rural area in China, and he has one horse. His horse ran away. And the farmer was without a horse. And the villagers came and commiserate and said, I'm so sorry, your horse is gone. And now what are you going to do? He says, maybe good, maybe bad. And the next day, the horse comes back. Not only comes back, it brings 3 or 4 wild horses come along. So now he has 4 or 5 horses. So now the villagers come, congratulate him. Hey, great, you have now 5 horses. Aren't you lucky? He says, maybe good, maybe bad. And next day, the farmer's son is mounting the horse, the wild horse, and falls and breaks his leg. And the villagers come again, commiserating. Oh, so sorry, your son's leg, broke. And he goes, maybe good, maybe bad. And the following day, the Chinese army comes to conscript the able-bodied young men to the army, and the men could not go. So maybe good, maybe bad. So it's the idea of watching yourself, is that anything comes it doesn't mean you don't act. We don't act. It's acting like a witness and acceptance of whatever comes our way. And that is such a difficult thing to do. I mean, right now in the COVID era, I mean, how much we are restless with what's going on. And I think keeping that idea of self-mastery to see we don't know what's good and what's bad. So there is a book, a short book I always recommend to my students called Zen in the Art of Archery. If those who want to, just a short book, 70-page book, and it is all about archery, through the art of archery, how we can practice self-mastery. So what are the ingredients, some of the ingredients I've been thinking about, and I want to build on it with your thoughts. So what is requires is self-discipline. We all understand what is discipline means. Integrity, not only with ourselves, with others. The people can count on us if we are called to do something. And strength in giving up anger, giving up hatred, whatever makes our mind not calm, giving up that. But I really like the idea of enlarging the idea of self, from self here to such a big self which includes all. Then it becomes from not just me to we, me to us, developing virtues of compassion and the trust in the design of the universe. And I think sometime we lost that trust. And in the Hindu text, one of the virtues that is the highest is considered is patience, dharya. Stay patient. And it's so hard we are such a go-getter, fast, go grab, fast food, this culture, that patience is a very difficult thing for us to do. And then lastly, this short list, there's many things, sympathetic joy, which is not just simply joy, just kind of, no matter what happens, Gandhi was very good with that. Humor, a little bit of humor. I think God was very funny. If God is out there, I think he's having fun with the world. So I think the humor can really help us to not take us too seriously. And I think really not taking our small self too seriously, it is a way forward to self-mastery. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Veena. I have so many questions, and yet I'm going to allow somebody else to lead us off. So whoever amongst you really would like to know perhaps more about what Veena's talking about, and maybe more about how Gandhi embodied some of the qualities that she mentioned.
Thank you for that very succinct and wide-ranging presentation. You covered a lot of ground. I was just wondering, because I think of Gandhi in particular as someone who had this very astute understanding of what was needed and of the role that he might be able to play. We think of it in relation to his work in South Africa or India, but wherever he was, it seemed like he had this sense of what was needed, not just for himself, but in terms of moving the people around him and the nation towards a better social and political order, a better understanding of themselves, a better understanding of the sacred in relation to their lives, and so on. So I connect that with the idea of Dharma, that he had this very astute understanding of what was needed and what the role that he could play in the world, at particular instances and situations that affected many thousands of people. So the question is, what's the relation? And it seemed like his emphasis upon self-government, Swaraj, had to do with the fulfillment of Dharma. It was in relation to his Dharma that self-rule became, not just for himself, but for others as well. It became like a critical component. And it seems like that's something that, each person could apply to their own situation, to the times that we're in, is this idea of Dharma, of, what should I be doing? And I was just wondering if you had some reflections about that the discovery of Dharma, individual Dharma, in relation, and how that relates or leads to or aids self-mastery.
Very good. And maybe 1 hour answer, just kidding. This is a very loaded question and very important question. And how do we know what we should do and what ought to be done, right? Dharma is what's my duty? What should I do? So my student asked me that question. What should I do? I mean, how did Gandhi figure out that this was his duty? Gandhi didn't know when he went to South Africa what was his duty was, in a way that we know. When he is, by the way, June 9th was the day when Gandhi was thrown out of the train in South Africa, right? 1893. So, which we just was celebrated, and a lot of scholars came together to reflect on that day. So when he is asked to leave the train, the compartment, because he's colored and he cannot ride in the first class compartment. And Gandhi says, no, I have a first class pass. And despite the laws of, South Africa, that the colored people can't ride in the first class compartments, I'm not so sure Gandhi was unaware of that. We don't know. We don't know whether Gandhi is acting as like naive, that, or it was deliberate effort to confront the unjust laws. But I think everything happens so fast that he finds himself on the platform and the train leaves. And in the autobiography, he says, I began to think about my duty. Exact word he uses. I began to think my duty. Should I go back to India, or should I stay here and fight against the injustices? And the word there he uses, duty or dharma. What is my dharma? I mean, when he goes next day to his, friends, and they say, well, just don't go in the first class compartment, right? But at that time, at that moment, he finds himself choosing that dharma of justice and equality. But for all of us, and I think there are certain dharmas which are called common dharmas. Dharmas are virtues and doing right, helping others, non-violence, truth, non-possession. All these are the called sadharan dharmas, or common duties that we all should abide by, not stealing. But then there are particular dharmas according to Hindu texts, that which are, my dharma might be at one time as a mother is a different kind of dharma, one as a teacher or as a neighbor or as a friend. But for Gandhi, the real dharma is to ourself, which is Swaraj, or freedom. our goal has to be centralized to get freedom within. He could said, I cannot fight for the India's freedom or even South Africa, the freedom from unjust laws, unless I have freed myself from the forces of passion, selfish desires that I am always under the command of. So he makes these two dharmas together. He makes it the dharma of helping others or freeing India or freeing people from injustices, but at the same time, personal Swaraj, personal freedom, they had to be together for him, which is a very, very unique example in the history, I think, of the politics, as far as we know of. That I think Marcus Aurelius talks about it some, but he has a different kind of language to speak about it. But in the recent history, Gandhi is the only one who brings together the inner freedom and outer freedom. I hope that answers your question.
Do you think, Veena, when Gandhi was doing a lot of experimenting, so he had a number of people around him by this time and living in ashram lifestyle with him, and he was doing all kinds of experiments with diet. I understand at one point they were even trying eating only 4 foods that started with the letter A. I know one of them was almonds. I don't know the rest of them. Was he doing that because he was so concerned about diet? Or was this more a matter of gaining self-control so that he would have maybe the inner muscle, the inner willpower to then be able to do something like to resist these unjust laws with nonviolent protests and not fight back when he and the people he was with were attacked by, the forces that they were going up against. So why was he, I was just wondering about these little disciplines that he would give himself. Could you speak?
Yeah, a very good question. So intrigues me, the food really, food is the basic need that we all have. And the food is something external. So 2 things he does from the very early on, the food and sexual control. He connects the sexual control of desires with the desires for food. So he has to have discipline in both ways. So the food is one thing and he loved to eat. That's also people don't know. He enjoyed eating. And so where do you go? You always restrain what you enjoy doing. And I think same was true with his personal life as well, sexual life. He had the 2 really, indulgences, so to speak. And the Hindu scriptures or Indian scriptures also talk about the relationship between control of the palate and control of other passions. So I think he starts with the diet becomes very, very, I think he becomes very obsessed by diet. And he's so funny about sometimes who just fruits and nuts, sometimes nuts and fruits, and sometimes lentils, sometimes no lentils, sometimes no grains, sometimes fasting, sometimes 1 week fasting, sometimes 1 day. Food is so interesting that if you can write a whole book on Gandhi's food practices. And I think if we look at today's world too, I think the food is such an important part of how we live, what we do. But he said, what do you need? You just need the simple, healthy food to, live. Why do we need all kinds of cuisines? We spend hours to cook and finish it in a few minutes. Sometimes I cook such an elaborate meal and takes 7 minutes to eat it. You're done. All these hours of work, cleaning and cooking. So I think that many things are going on. One is self-control is going on, but he's desiring to eat a lot of different kind of foods. Second is going on the simplifying his life. We know if we eat simply, then we have less, things to do, because less clean up, less worrying about food. And also he's preparing himself to go to jail. He knows in jail he's not going to get gourmet food types. So if I live an ascetic life right now, so when I'm in jail, so I'm not bothered by it, because that's what I am used to of it. That's what I'm not craving for anything. So it is a very practical reason as well. And the fourth is tapas, that he really thinks that by self-restraint, we get this spiritual energy. So not simply, I'm going to diet, be anorexic, that kind of thing, but it's a potent self-control in a very spiritual, as a spiritual practice. So when he says that I'm fasting, see, the people's minds will be changed and they will see what they're doing wrong. And the people, every time he took a life unto, or the fast unto death, his fast never lasted more than 6 days. People just stopped fighting, or people just stopped, or his desires or demands were fulfilled. Even though he said that I'm going to fast till unto death. So I think the food was such a, in the Upanishad, they said, Anna Brahm, food is Brahman. Food is divine reality. And we don't see that in that way. So the food is, you're giving me an idea to write an article on that now, because I haven't read anywhere the way I'm thinking on my feet. I had not thought about, to be honest, before. So speaking of food, there's a story, and this is a real story, when a mother goes to Gandhi and with a little boy, 7 or 8 years old, he said, he loves to eat these laddus, mithai, which is a sweet. And Gandhi just pats on the head of the boy, and I said, okay. And he leaves, and mother says, maybe he's busy, he doesn't want to say anything. And when she comes back again to visit Gandhi's prayer meetings, and he says, hey, young man, boy, come here. He said, comes to him, he goes, do you still eat that sweet? He said, yes. He said, your mother tells you? He said, don't eat that sweet, okay? I tell you, don't, this is not good for you. And the mother just, Gandhi, why didn't you tell him the other day? Why were you too busy? He goes, no, I was eating myself that sweet that time. I had to stop eating. Now I have stopped for a week, that I can tell him not to eat it. So he could not tell these satyagrahis or nonviolent resistors to go to jail and eat. The jail food was so bad for the vegetarians, when he himself did not practice that kind of austerity in real life. So, imagine our leaders, today's world, or even ever, living a life of what our soldiers experience on the front lines. So he wanted to really exactly live a life that he wanted others to do. That's what was his dharma. That was his duty to do. Great question, Renée.
There may be a link that might have to do with service, because I think Gandhi really emphasized that service is like the way to self-transformation. But I think the key to it all, and maybe you could say some more about this, is the freedom to self-correct, to correct ourselves, to be honest about our motive. And at one point, I think Gandhi said, oh, I've made Himalayan mistakes. But he was always willing, seemingly, to assess things and self-correct. Could you say a bit more about that?
Absolutely, very right. There are not many people, again, I speak as a scholar, not as just a fond of Gandhi's ideas, who were so candidly honest with themselves. He was so hard on himself, and he will publish his mistakes in the newspapers. If he had some kind of a sexual dream, he'll put in the newspaper. Why are you doing that? You know? So what happens then? He got himself in trouble, right? I mean, now scholars talk about, look at Gandhi. Gandhi was like this. Well, he had the choice not to tell us, not to announce in the newspaper, right? So he had two were very interesting things that were very unique. That you're right, he really self-accountability. What he's telling others, he is trying to live every day more than others can even think about living, which is a very, very difficult trait. We all know that. And the second was his ability and desire to engage with his critics. That is, you know, most of the time when press is asking difficult questions, you know, our leaders go this way. And he will always answer the question of his critics, not of his, those of his admirers. So I love his quote. He says, the difference of opinion must not mean hostility. Difference of opinion must not mean hostility. And absolutely, that he was, I think that's the one, if we want to see a checklist of people who have self-mastery, and that is very, I think what you said, Maurice, right? It's one of the top, that how do you are honest to yourself. And being, it's so easy to tell our children, so easy to tell others, but looking within, and be humility to publicly admit your mistake and publicly share, not only just admit it, to publicly humiliate yourself. The humility with humiliating yourself. I mean, he does. And I think he kind of gets a kind of masochistic joy in that, you know, it's just like saying, look, I wasn't perfect. I told you so. Don't call me Mahatma anymore. So it's kind of very intriguing to see his life. So great point.
Thank you.
I have a question. The size of the part, I mean, it was just a sparkling talk from A to Z. Very enjoyable. Had the quality of being enjoyable as well as being interesting, and making some very wonderful points. But I do have a question. It has to do with the power of a vow. Now, for just a moment, if someone's going to be a good engineer, they have to have knowledge. If you don't have knowledge of engineering, how can you solve problems in engineering or do creative ventures in engineering? To do that, you have to go through the process of study and discipline, right? So to be free as an engineer to do well, you have to have knowledge. Freedom can't be ignorance. If you're ignorant, you're not really free, right? You don't have the knowledge to do what needs to be done, your duty, as you were pointing out earlier. So now, but when you take this the way you put it in terms of conquering fears, passions, and various things, now you're talking about internal freedom, right? So when you think there and you think Gandhi, this is where Satya comes in. Satya is necessary for true freedom to be realized. However, when you bring up the things and you mention, you know, aptly about the Gita, my question becomes this: since the internal battles are so much more difficult in terms of, say, mastering engineer or studying a lot of hours and doing practicums, so to master the self or the passions and prejudices and so forth, is this why Gandhi then talks about the importance of a power of the vow to truth and nonviolence? Because how can you be free without Because you need something like the power of a vow in order to be able to master oneself internally? That would be my question.
Jim, nice to see you. It's great on my big screen, finally. I've been meaning to meet you in person someday. Excellent question. And I wanted to bring, I have on my screen the word vow and vrata and pledge.
Yeah.
That is most people don't want to go there for some reason in our world.
Yeah.
Because when I ask my students, what is a vow? They just go quiet and they say, well, the marriage vows. I said, what's the definition of vow? Commitment. Yes. I said, okay, Gandhi says, when you're committed, you're completely committed. How are we doing as a culture in our marriage vows? And they all laugh and they go, well, we have a 50, 60% divorce rate. This comes from them. I don't say anything. The only example they know of a vow, right? Commitment. And that commitment is, they don't see it kept in our world because it's not considered, it's almost like a conditional commitment, right? For Gandhi, it was a unwavering commitment for those ideas and ideals, right? So what Gandhi said, life without a vow is a ship without a rudder, or ship out on the open sea. What will happen to it? It will be just, fall apart because there's no one is steering it. No one is taking command of it. So for vow for him was a very, very essential part of our life. He knew that the people won't be able to keep the vow forever. So what he did in his personal life, he took the vow of truth, nonviolence, as we know, the 5 principles, non-possession, poverty, fearlessness. But for the people, he said, okay, I want you to take the vow for a short time. So when I see our movements today's day, and I think what sometimes our problem is that we don't have that commitment. We say, I'll try to do it. I'll do to best of my ability, right? There is a big difference between, we always leave a little room, wiggle room for, getting out of that. We don't even have the idea of vow as a religious vows were, Catholics took the vows of poverty, commitment, those monastics. But now we don't even have any examples of vows in our life. We feel, okay, I won't eat this food for a week. Oh, well, the Lent time. I have, young people tell me that, well, I was not supposed to eat sugar, but the chocolate is not sugar because it has a, sherbetol. It doesn't have real sugar, so I can eat it, So I think we find little loopholes. So, but we cannot understand self-mastery without the term vow. I mean, we cannot have that. They have to come together. And it could be, not grandiose vows, but when I say something to show up, I show up. When I say something in my life to be honest, I have my own example. So I took a vow to not eat meat or drink alcohol when I was 11 years of age. So I was in India our gurus gave us these vows I don't tell many people. I was little, I said, would you not drink alcohol? And before you take meditation, I said, yes, will not do. So India, there's no occasions for us to eat meat and drink alcohol because, we live in a very traditional families. I come to Italy at a religious youth service, inter-religious youth service camp. And there was one night that was 29 years ago. We didn't have anything in the food which didn't have any product without meat. There were either meat broth or chicken broth or something or something. Here I am young and hungry, and somebody says, you know, eat salad. And salad was all cut eggs on it, and I didn't even eat eggs. So what do? Some people were just picking out and eating, those who are Indian vegetarians with me. And I thought about that time, what am I supposed to do here? And I said, okay, I just won't eat tonight. I'm not going to die with hunger. I'm pretty fine. So, but I'm still very hungry. And there was a seminary we were staying in Rome, near Rome. So I went to bed. And then 11 o'clock, I heard the knock on my door, our dorm door. And this brother comes and he had this pear in his hand. He goes, I heard that you have not eaten today. So here is a pear for you, because you won't be able to sleep hungry. And that pear tasted so good that day. So I think that it's so easy to take the vow, but it's very difficult. Even a simple vow can be difficult to keep. And that's Gandhi said, it's really when the test comes whether you can keep it. It's so easy to do when I have now a fridge full of vegetarian food and abundance of vegetarian food. But then when test comes, and that's how he lived the test, right? When the test came, how do I behave then? And nobody can see but me. My parents weren't there, my family is there, my guru is not there. Nobody would have known. All these stranger people. Who is seeing? Myself, right? It's yourself. And this is the one all throughout life. But when we live like that, which I'm not at all, that I wouldn't call myself at all self-mastery. But when we try to live like that, it is amazingly joyful moment in life, because it feels so right. It feels so good, because no one is making you accountable, but you are yourself making yourself accountable, right? So I think and when you said prejudices, racism, all these ideas, what I do with that, how I make a pledge, how I make the duty, and all these things come together. That is the whole idea to thank you for bringing that. I have a big word vow, but I didn't say it because I was a little resistant of saying that. Thank you, Jim.
Yes, thank you. That's just, what a delight.
I think that Veena's fourth question was people that we know of either in our lives or historically that we think of as having self-mastery. And I was wondering what came to mind for people when she asked that question. Who came to mind, I should ask.
I'll jump right in and say the pair of you right there came to mind immediately for me. The center you've created and Prometheus, mastery of sports, just the level of discipline that you guys have led your life to bring yourself to this point. You just immediately popped to mind.
Does somebody have another answer? But thank you, David.
Good answer.
You gotta aim higher than that. You gotta aim a lot higher than that.
Well, I just started listing the figures that came to mind when I heard the question. So it's not a complete list, but it starts to cover. I think the rainbow is the Buddha, Jesus, Krishna, Mahavira, who is amongst the Jains, is their founder, you could say. Guru Nanak, amongst the Sikhs, Pythagoras, absolutely, the father of Western philosophy and science, and of a school that lasted for centuries. Iamblichus and those who followed him, who are we know very little about, but from what we can tell, they had reached a kind of level of self-mastery, which I would call also adeptship. It's another term for it. Plato is another figure in history that, to my mind, represents this ideal of self-mastery. So there's just a few to throw out.
Wow.
One that came to mind for me, and I think he's a very wonderful example, is Nelson Mandela. I think his capacity to see beyond his own suffering and the injustice that was done to him. And then when he became, president of South Africa, he was very Gandhian, and he writes a beautiful article on Gandhi anyway, in which he even says, Gandhi to him was the ideal, and he doesn't even claim to measure up to him at all, but he just thinks Gandhi was remarkable. But one can see in Nelson Mandela the fact that he refused to do the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth principle, completely. And he did his very best to see that South Africa got away from that and tried to turn enemies into friends and tried to get people to cooperate for a better South Africa. Now, it fell apart later on, but at least he made a genuine effort when and where it counted, to use your point, Veena, a beautiful point about wiggle room. He didn't really give himself wiggle room when it came to being very firm and clear about the principle and the direction. Imperfections, yes. Whatever mistakes, yes. But he was clear about it. And he meant it. He was genuine. And if you ever see that wonderful movie, what is it called? Invictus?
Yeah.
You see that wonderful movie where he uses the South African, team of the sport? I forgot what they call it. But anyway, rugby. But I mean, it's an amazing example of a magician, of someone who uses something to change evil into good, to change something that could have been divisive into something that unifies. And that's a Gandhian example to me, in practice, in actu, in the world.
Okay, women, Veena's done a lot of the heavy lifting here.
I was thinking of athletes, Olympic athletes, gymnasts, not any particular one, or ballet dancer, just people who just have such incredible mastery of their sport and their body and mind to make it to that kind of elite, elite level. So I think that was kind of, I guess, what jumped to my mind.
I realized that in listening and in this conversation, that when I am sitting in some spiritual reflection and thinking about who, envisioning even Buddha or someone, a symbol, really one of the things that's at the core of that aspiration is self-mastery. And this brought that I've had that practice of looking up to these figures, but I didn't realize that self-mastery was one of the core aspects that really brings a lot of respect. That's really something in little increments and small steps, we can keep working that muscle and getting stronger in that. It's a great aspiration, I think, in general. I don't know if it'll, not to get anywhere, but I think it's a worthy cause.
I want to add, thank you. For Gandhi, we talk about Gandhi, but we forget about his wife, Kasturba. She was the real embodiment of self-mastery. And she was the real unsung heroine in the story of Gandhi's life. And I think we all should, all the people that we are quoting, a lot of them are male. But I think if we read her life, that you'll see that Gandhi became Gandhi because of her. The way she sacrificed, the way she held him accountable, the way she could call him out when he was becoming out of control in his own little world. So I think it's very, very important to note that, I think the people are working on a documentary on her, and we need more research, more writing, that even though she was quiet, but she became a leader on her own right. And I just read a very book, but Cliff had given me the hard copy of the Guha's book, and the scene when she dies and how Gandhi really lose self-control, first time in life when he sees her, leaving him. So I think it's 3 days, 2 days until she was cremated, he sat by her side and would not move, will not eat. So I think that's another very, very important example, Kasturba.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone who wanted to maybe bring up another example of self-mastery in the female form before we close?
Mother Teresa came to mind. And the thing I always think about Mother Teresa is, if you're having difficulties in your personal life, take on a bigger challenge. Find a bigger problem than, what tonight's dinner is going to be. And she always reminds me of that. She just keeps giving, just keeps taking on bigger and bigger outside of herself.
Thank you.
For me, also, my mother, I think she was my heroine. And I think I've hear stories of other self-restrained and self-mastery people, and she was the real role model for me. So it's really nice to think about. We had this Mother's Day not long ago, and think about those, not necessarily the famous people who are, but I think what David said about Renée and Cliff, right? I mean, that was very poignant to mention that.
I want to thank Veena so much for that lucid talk, and one that obviously really came from the heart. This was, even though she is a scholar, she's not a scholar who just pulls out a dusty book and starts reading to us from it. She's somebody who digs deep and thinks through things from the standpoint of, how do I live my own life if I'm going to talk about this topic, and what kind of questions do I have? So that was just an amazing example of the kind of talk that can really reach to all of us and cause us to ask deep questions about our lives in terms of freedom and self-mastery. Thank you ever so much, Veena.
Thank you.
So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Veena. And thank you for everyone who attended today's Gems from the Wisdom Traditions.